They set his car on fire thinking he was a threat, but he was actually the sheriff. You ever have one of those days where you're just tired of being in charge? That was Sheriff Malcolm Raines on a humid Thursday in July. He left his badge on the dresser, swapped his uniform for an old t-shirt, jeans, and scuffed work boots, and climbed into his dusty 2010 Dodge Charger. The car was loud, grumbling with every turn of the ignition, but it was his. He'd kept it since his first year on the force. That day, it felt right to drive something that didn't scream authority. His destination? His late mother's old place in Bastrop, Louisiana. A neglected, single-story house on a patch of land that time had mostly forgotten. The paint had peeled, the yard was more weeds than grass, and the chain-link fence leaned like it'd given up. But for Malcolm, it was home. Or, at least, it had been. He hadn't been back in over a year, not since the funeral, so he pulled up, cut the engine, and stepped out into the muggy heat with a toolbox in one hand and a cooler in the other. Just a man doing yard work, clearing brush, replacing rotted boards, maybe fixing the busted porch light his mom used to complain about. He was on the side of the house, tugging at some stubborn vines wrapped around a rusted gutter when he heard tires on gravel. At first, he didn't think much of it. Could have been anyone. Plenty of folks passed through this part of town. But then he heard the doors slam. 2 sets, quick and heavy. He turned around slowly, wiping sweat off his brow. 2 patrol officers in crisp tan uniforms were walking toward him. One was maybe mid-20s, white, tall, and stiff like he was trying too hard to look official. The other was younger, black, with a nervous energy in the way he scanned the yard. Both had their hands resting near their belts. Malcolm narrowed his eyes. "Afternoon," he said, casual but alert. The white officer didn't return the greeting. He just looked Malcolm up and down like he was trying to figure out what box to put him in. "You live here?" he asked flatly. Malcolm straightened up. "Used to. My mother did anyway." "This your vehicle?" The officer nodded toward the Charger. "Yeah, registered to me. Sheriff Malcolm Raines, Clayton County." He didn't pull out his wallet yet. Old habits. First, gauge the room. The younger black officer tilted his head. "You said you're a sheriff?" "That's right. Taking a personal day. Doing a little work on the place. Everything all right, officers?" The white officer didn't seem convinced. "We got a call about a suspicious person loitering near this property. Description matches you." Malcolm's jaw flexed. "Loitering?" He gestured to the gloves in his back pocket. "I'm pulling vines off a gutter, man." "We'll need to see some ID," the taller officer snapped, hand now resting fully on his holstered taser. "Step away from the vehicle." Malcolm held his ground. "I can get my wallet. It's in the front seat. Keys are in my pocket." "Not asking again," the officer said, stepping forward. That's when Malcolm knew. This wasn't about a call. It wasn't about the house. These two were green. Too much adrenaline, not enough judgment. And worst of all, they didn't recognize the very man who taught the legal code in the academy 3 counties over. He raised both hands slightly, trying to keep things calm. "I'm not trying to be difficult, but you're making a mistake." The younger officer shifted uncomfortably. "Maybe we should just let him get his ID." "No," the other cut in. "We don't know what's in that car." Malcolm's voice dropped. "What's in that car is my badge, my driver's license, and a sandwich I packed this morning. You want it? I'll open it slow." But it didn't matter, because from that moment on, the conversation stopped being about facts and became a power play. But these officers didn't realize that the man they were pressing wasn't just another face in an old neighborhood. He was their superior in everything but name. Just 2 blocks away, inside a pale green duplex with a sagging porch and wind chimes clinking lazily in the heat, Glenna Burke was watching from behind her floral curtains. She was the one who made the call. Glenna was 63, a retired clerk who spent most of her days watching cable news and looking through her front window. Her neighborhood had changed over the years, and not in ways she liked to talk about out loud, but she felt them. She saw a man she didn't recognize pulling up in an old car, wearing work clothes, walking around the side of a house she thought was abandoned. That was all it took. "I don't want to be a bother," she told dispatch, "but there's a man creeping around the vacant Raines property. Could be breaking in or something. You know how things are these days?" It wasn't malicious, at least not intentionally, but it was careless. And in that moment, it set everything in motion. Back on the property, Malcolm stood under the heat of the sun and the weight of suspicion. The 2 officers, Officer Kendricks and Officer Blake, weren't budging. Kendricks, the white officer, circled the car, inspecting it like it had something to prove. Blake stayed closer to Malcolm, shifting between compliance and hesitation, like he wasn't sure whose side to take. Malcolm sighed. Listen, Kendricks, is it? Kendricks didn't look up. You heard my partner. Step away from the vehicle. I'm telling you one last time, Malcolm said, now with just a touch of grit in his voice. I'm not reaching into anything without you watching every move I make. I've been in law enforcement for over 30 years. I know how this goes. I'm not trying to get jumped because somebody got nervous. Officer Blake stepped in, trying to mediate. If you are who you say you are, we'll get this cleared up fast. Malcolm raised an eyebrow. You think I'd be lying about being a sheriff? In broad daylight? On my own mother's lawn? Blake looked away, suddenly unsure. I mean, you gotta admit, it does look suspicious. Malcolm laughed dryly, without humor. You know what's suspicious? 2 officers pulling up on an empty house without asking real questions and assuming the worst. That's suspicious. But Kendricks wasn't listening. He was walking back, now talking into his radio. Malcolm caught a few words. Requesting K9 unit, possible stolen vehicle, subject not complying. Not complying? Malcolm repeated sharply. I've done nothing but talk. I'm standing here with my hands out like I'm posing for a brochure on how not to get shot. Kendricks raised his voice. Stay calm, sir. I am calm. You're the one escalating. Then Kendricks muttered something that made Malcolm's stomach twist. I smell gasoline. Malcolm frowned. That's probably from the rusted shed. There's old tools, maybe some open containers from years ago, but nobody poured anything recently. Kendricks ignored him. Could be a trap car. Could be booby-trapped. Booby-trapped? Malcolm repeated, stunned. Are you serious? Kendricks turned back to his radio. Might be dealing with something bigger. Let's play it safe. Play it safe. That's when Malcolm knew they weren't backing down. Not because of danger, because of pride. Because they'd made up their minds, and now they needed something, anything, to justify their paranoia. Blake looked unsure, sweat glistening on his forehead. Malcolm stepped slightly closer. You don't smell gas. You smell fear. You called this in. Now you don't know how to walk it back, but you're going too far. Blake looked at Kendricks. Maybe we should just run the plates, see who the car belongs to. But Kendricks wasn't hearing any of it. He was on a mission now. But Malcolm knew this wasn't about checking IDs anymore. This was heading towards something reckless, something you couldn't undo once it was done. 10 minutes had passed, the kind that stretch and pull like hours when everything feels wrong. Malcolm stood still, watching the officers through a mix of disbelief and restraint. He'd trained rookies like these. He'd coached them through traffic stops, domestic calls, and more tense situations than he could count. But these 2 weren't listening. Not to logic, not to reason, and definitely not to him. Officer Kendricks was pacing now, barking updates into his radio like he was coordinating a hostage negotiation. Subject is non-compliant. Possible accelerant detected, requesting additional backup. Malcolm couldn't believe it. Non-compliant? You've got to be kidding me. I've said 5 times who I am. All you had to do was run the tags or check my ID. Blake was still shifting between the 2, looking more and more like a man who didn't sign up for what was happening. He rubbed the back of his neck, eyes darting toward the dusty Charger. Maybe we should let him show ID. Just keep him in sight. But Kendricks was too far gone. He had the energy of someone trying to win a scene, not de-escalate it. If it's a trap, we can't risk letting him near that car. Malcolm shook his head, slowly and with weight. This isn't about safety. This is about saving face. Kendricks snapped. Step away from the car, now. I'm not near the car, Malcolm said, arms out slightly, palms visible. I haven't moved in 10 minutes. You're acting defensive, Kendricks barked. No, Malcolm replied calmly. I'm acting like a man who's been black and in law enforcement long enough to know how fast this can go sideways. That line hit Blake like a slap. He looked down, lips pressed tight, saying nothing, but Kendricks just doubled down. He turned toward Blake. I think he poured gas. Could be trying to light the car. Saw something shiny in his hand earlier. You saw my wrench, Malcolm said flatly. It was a wrench. I was working on the porch before you got here. Blake rubbed his forehead. Can we just call in the plate? But Kendricks was moving again, this time toward the patrol vehicle, popping the trunk. He came back with a red plastic gas canister. Malcolm's voice dropped to a harsh whisper. "What are you doing?" "Playing it safe," Kendricks replied. He uncapped the canister and splashed the liquid across the hood of Malcolm's Charger. Blake jumped back. "Whoa, what the hell are you doing?" Kendricks didn't answer. Malcolm couldn't believe what he was seeing. "You just poured fuel on my car. What kind of safety protocol is that?" Kendricks's hands were shaking slightly now, his eyes darting between Malcolm and the vehicle. "If it's wired, we need to neutralize it before backup arrives." Blake stepped forward, grabbing Kendricks's arm. "You can't just let go," Kendricks snapped, pulling free. "We neutralize the threat." Blake stared at him. "You don't know what you're doing." "You think I'm wrong?" Kendricks barked. "Then take command. File the report. Explain why you let a suspect near a potential bomb." Blake hesitated, and that's all Kendricks needed. He struck a flare, the kind used for roadside warnings, and tossed it toward the front of the car. It hit the hood with a hiss, then flames. Malcolm flinched. He didn't move toward it. He didn't scream. He didn't lunge. He just stood there, arms out, face burning from something hotter than the fire. Rage, disbelief, years of service, and this. The fire spread quickly. The old rubber tires, the cracked leather seats, even the papers on the passenger side, all gone in seconds. Inside the glove compartment was a folder of his mother's will, a worn photo of her from 1963, and the last birthday card she ever wrote him. All of it burned. Blake turned away. "Oh my God." Kendricks stood stiffly, chest puffed, acting like he'd done something heroic. Malcolm watched the flames rise, his eyes locked on the fire but seeing none of it. Just static, just noise, just heat and heartbreak. Nobody said a word for a full minute. Then Malcolm spoke, softly. "You're going to regret that." But it wasn't a threat. It was the kind of truth that sits in your stomach and grows heavier with every second that passes. The smoke rose like a signal, loud, messy, undeniable. Neighbors started stepping out onto porches, some with phones already recording, some just staring, unsure what they were seeing. Malcolm stayed still, jaw locked, fists clenched but lowered. He didn't blink. His Charger was fully engulfed now. Flames chewed through the trunk. The windshield buckled and popped, spraying bits of glass onto the dry grass. Blake was pacing in small circles, mumbling under his breath. This is not protocol, man. This is not what we do." Kendricks ignored him. His eyes were fixed on Malcolm, as if still trying to figure out what box to force him into. And deep down, maybe he knew. Maybe the pieces were starting to click. The way Malcolm carried himself. The command in his voice, the calm that came not from fear, but from experience. But it was too late now. He doubled down again. "Sir, step away from the vehicle," Kendricks ordered, voice sharp, hollow. The absurdity hung in the air like smoke. The vehicle was gone. Just a burning shell now. Malcolm looked at him like he was asking a man to stop pushing a boulder that already fell off a cliff. "I told you," Malcolm said evenly. "You didn't want to listen." Kendrick stepped closer. "You're not being cooperative." Malcolm didn't move. "And you're not being rational." More sirens in the distance. They were coming fast now. Backup likely. Maybe a fire truck. Maybe someone with more stripes than Kendrick's. Someone who could smell this whole thing for what it really was. Blake looked up. "We need to shut this down, right now. This is bigger than us." Kendrick snapped at him. "You scared? You think he's going to do something?" Malcolm shook his head slowly, bitter amusement in his eyes. "Do something? Man, I did nothing. I showed up to fix a porch light." That landed hard. The silence afterward felt heavier than before. And then a second cruiser pulled up, tires crunching gravel as it skidded to a stop. Out stepped Lieutenant Gerald Finch, a man in his late 40s with broad shoulders, creased brows, and enough time in uniform to smell a disaster before his boots even hit the ground. He took one look at the scene, Malcolm, the burning car, the two rookies, and his face darkened like a storm cloud. He marched forward. "What in the hell happened here?" Kendrick straightened, trying to pull himself together. "We got a call about a suspicious person, possible stolen vehicle, smelled accelerant. We neutralized the threat." Finch turned to the flames. "Neutralized? That is car?" "Yes, sir." Finch looked to Malcolm. looked hard, then looked again, and something shifted in his face. He blinked, squinting, then stepped forward. "Wait, hold on." He turned to Malcolm, slower this time. "Is that?" Malcolm finally reached into his back pocket and pulled out a half-melted badge holder, charred around the edges, but still readable. Finch's jaw locked. "Sheriff Malcolm Rains, Clayton County." Blake took a full step back. Kendrick stuttered. You're... "I told you," Malcolm said, low and bitter, "over and over again." Finch turned, face red. "You poured fuel on a sheriff's car and set it on fire?" Kendricks tried to justify. "Sir, we thought..." "You thought?" Finch barked. "You thought what? That a 30-year lawman came out here to stage a damn explosion? That he decided today was the day he was going to fake a break-in at his mother's house?" Blake stayed quiet, shoulders sagging under the weight of it. Finch looked at the fire again, now mostly smoke and twisted metal. "This is going to turn into a lawsuit," he muttered, then louder. "Get the fire crew over here. Get these people off their phones. And someone better start explaining why we've got a sheriff's personal vehicle burning like a bonfire in the middle of Bastrop." Malcolm didn't say anything. He didn't need to. The neighborhood had seen it. The phones had caught it. The truth didn't need shouting anymore. It was visible, undeniable. And even now, with the truth out in the open, nobody could look him in the eye. But Malcolm wasn't finished watching, because he knew the fire might be out soon, but the real damage hadn't even started yet. The fire department arrived minutes later, sirens howling through the neighborhood like a warning that came too late. Thick, gray smoke coiled above the street, blocking the sun. The car hissed as water hit what was left of the engine. The foam spread across the pavement, carrying bits of ash and charred metal down the slight slope of the driveway. The Dodge was done. Beyond repair, beyond recognition. Malcolm stood there with his arms crossed, jaw tight, lips pressed into a hard, bitter line. Lieutenant Finch had moved off to the side, radio pressed to his ear, speaking low and fast into dispatch. Damage control mode, trying to get ahead of what was already spiraling. Blake sat on the curb, elbows on his knees, head down. His rookie uniform, once crisp, was soaked in sweat and embarrassment. He hadn't moved much since the badge came out. He looked like someone who'd just learned the cost of being quiet at the wrong time. But Kendricks? He still wasn't getting it. He kept pacing, trying to explain it all to anyone who would listen. Finch, fire crew, even himself. "I followed protocol. We had a report. Suspicious activity. It looked like he was trying to gain entry. I smelled something. I acted to eliminate a potential hazard. That's not misconduct. That's precaution." Finch turned and barked. "You poured gas on a man's car." Kendricks shot back. "I used our gas canister." Finch's face twisted. "That doesn't make it legal." Malcolm spoke up, voice calm, but every word sharp. "You were scared of being wrong, so you created a scene to make it feel right." That silenced everyone around them. Even the fire crew stopped moving for a second. Kendricks pointed. "You weren't wearing a badge. You weren't in uniform. You didn't identify yourself properly." "I said my name. I told you my title. You had every chance to verify it. But you didn't want to check. You wanted control." Blake looked up at that. Malcolm's voice didn't rise, but the weight behind it grew with every word. "You know what the real threat was? Not my car, not me. It was the idea that maybe you were wrong, and that scared you more than anything else." Finch stepped between them. "That's enough." Malcolm didn't move. "No, it isn't." He turned toward Kendricks, then pointed to the pile of melted black and twisted steel. "That car had things in it you'll never understand. My mother's last birthday card to me was in the glove box, a family photo from 1963. My notes from my first day at the academy, gone. You didn't just destroy a vehicle, you erased history." Kendricks's posture changed. Just slightly. Not guilt, but something close to doubt. Like, maybe he was starting to see the edges of the mess he'd made. Finch looked to Malcolm, lowering his voice. "I'll write this up. You'll have everything you need. Video, audio, body cams. You file whatever complaint you want. And you should." Malcolm nodded once. No thank you. No eye contact. Just a quiet agreement. Blake stood up finally, still pale. "I should have said something sooner," he said. You should have, Malcolm replied, but you didn't. Now live with that. Blake didn't defend himself. He just nodded, and that silence hit deeper than any argument ever could. Then, from across the street, Glenna Burke stepped out from her porch. She looked around nervously before crossing the street. She approached slowly, hands clasped together in front of her. I called it in, she said, her voice shaking. I saw someone, and I didn't know. Malcolm looked at her, not angry, just tired. I lived here. That was my mama's house. You didn't ask questions. You just assumed. I'm sorry, she whispered. I believe you, he said, but sorry doesn't rebuild memories. She didn't say another word. She turned and walked away, shrinking with every step. But even as the fire burned out and the smoke began to clear, Malcolm knew the hardest part hadn't hit yet, because accountability was always the slowest thing to arrive. The fire was gone, but the smell stayed. Burnt rubber, scorched leather, fried wiring. It clung to the air, thick and bitter. A scent that would stick to Malcolm's clothes, his skin, maybe even his memory. The Dodge Charger, once loud, dependable, and full of history, was now nothing but a blackened carcass. The wheels had melted into the gravel. The roof had caved. The badge that once sat on the passenger seat had been reduced to a scrap of metal, barely holding its shape. And still, Malcolm hadn't raised his voice once. Not when they questioned him like a criminal. Not when they ignored his name. Not even when they lit the match that destroyed everything. Lieutenant Finch stood beside him now, arms crossed. Neither man spoke for a while. Then Finch finally broke the silence. You want me to call someone? State office? Internal affairs? Malcolm didn't respond at first. He just stared at what was left of his car, jaw clenched. Then quietly, no. Finch looked surprised. No? I'll handle it, Malcolm said. You sure? Malcolm nodded once. Too sure. Finch took a deep breath and stepped back, giving the sheriff his space. Around them, the neighborhood had quieted. A few bystanders were still filming. A few just stared, trying to piece it together. Nobody was speaking loud anymore. The story had already begun writing itself on Facebook feeds and group chats across Bastrop. A sheriff, a fire, 2 rookies, a mistake that couldn't be unburned. Blake approached again, slowly this time. He looked different now, smaller somehow. Not in height, but in presence. I should have trusted what I felt earlier, he said. It didn't feel right, but I followed his lead. Malcolm studied him for a moment, then said something Blake didn't expect. That's the kind of choice that follows you. Blake looked down. I know. Then learn from it, Malcolm added, voice steady. And make sure the next time someone needs you to speak up, you don't freeze. Blake nodded, not defensively, not to be polite, but like he meant it. Then he stepped away. Kendricks didn't come back over. He stood near the squad car, arms crossed, sunglasses back on, like hiding his eyes would hide what he'd done. He didn't look sorry. He looked worried. Malcolm didn't care anymore. That wasn't his problem. Finch walked back over with a clipboard and a pen. Need anything written down before you go? Malcolm shook his head. I'll file it officially. You want to ride back to town? Malcolm stared at the ruins of his car for a long second before answering. No, I'll walk. Finch hesitated, then nodded. If you need backup on this, I won't, Malcolm said. Finch gave him a small nod, respectful this time, then turned and left him alone. Malcolm walked toward the road, slow, steady. The sun was lower now, casting long shadows across the gravel. His boots crunched each step, the silence wrapping around him like armor. He didn't look back. He didn't have to. But deep down, Malcolm knew this wasn't the end. It was just the part where people started watching for what he'd do next. The next morning, Malcolm was back at the station. Fresh shave, clean uniform, the gold star on his chest polished and gleaming. He walked in without a word, just the sound of his boots echoing down the hallway. Deputies and staff paused when they saw him. A few nodded. A few looked away. News traveled fast in small-town law enforcement, and what happened in Bastrop was already the talk of every precinct from Monroe to Lake Providence. Malcolm didn't speak to anyone. He headed straight to his office, closed the door behind him, and sat at his desk. He opened his laptop, clicked New Report, and started typing. Not with emotion, not with rage, but with clarity, detail by detail, timeline, badge numbers, dialogue, the smell of smoke, the feeling of being told to step away from the life he'd built with honor. He didn't embellish, he didn't soften, he just told the truth. When he was done, he printed it, signed it. Then, from his drawer, he pulled out the twisted metal scrap that used to be his badge, warped, blackened, but still faintly recognizable. He set it on the desk. Later that day, he met with State Inspector Regina Holt, who'd already reviewed the footage and body cam logs. She was direct, no nonsense, listened more than she talked. After reviewing everything, she asked him, "Do you want them fired?" Malcolm didn't answer right away. He looked at the photos of the burned car, the heat map from the K9 team that never even showed up, the face of Glenna Burke through a neighbor's phone video as she watched the car go up in flames. Then he replied, "I want them to learn, but more than that, I want everyone in this building to remember that no title, no uniform, no seniority protects you from being treated like a suspect when someone's afraid of the truth." Regina nodded slowly. "There'll be consequences." "There should be," he said, "for all of it." A week later, Officer Kendricks was placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation. Blake stayed on, under review, with mandatory retraining. Glenna Burke sent a handwritten apology and a check, small but sincere. And Malcolm? He kept working. But something had changed. He drove a county-issued vehicle now, sleek, quiet, but it didn't feel the same. The old Charger had memories, soul. That car had taken him to arrests, funerals, birthdays, and his mama's church. It was more than transportation. It was a piece of him. And what they burned wasn't just metal. It was trust. So from then on, he made it a point to walk the floor more, check in with the youngest deputies, ask hard questions in training. And when someone pulled a rookie aside to tell the story of what happened to Sheriff Rains in Bastrop, he didn't stop them. Because the lesson had to live longer than the flames. At the front of his office, right under the plaque with his name, he mounted the damaged badge, framed in glass, bent, blackened, still his, still earned. Because respect isn't given by a title, and real authority isn't in the badge. It's in how you carry yourself when no one else sees your worth. If this story hit you, don't just walk away. Ask yourself what you would have done if you were Officer Blake, or Glenna, or even Kendricks. Speak up when it matters. Question what you think you know, and if you ever have power, use it right. That's how we make sure justice isn't just a word, it's a promise.